Hello, I'm Forrest Keegle and I'm a visual artist, and we're here on Jara country, the home of the Jajawarang people. I'd like to pay my respects to their ancestors from the Everywen and my deep respect for this country that sustains us. We're working on a project called Out of the Box for Multicultural Arts Victoria, MAV, and we're here at the Emporium Creative Hub where I'll be interviewing 4 amazing artists. So you'll get to learn more about their artistic journey, their cultural roots, what sustains them and what they're doing creatively. So thanks very much to Regional Arts Victoria for funding this program. It's the culmination of 3 years of funding, and it's a program to showcase regional artists in Bendigo and Shepparton. And enjoy watching and learning more about these artists, because I certainly have. Okay, welcome Aryo. It's great to see you on this lovely morning.
Thank you, Forrest. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and your creative self?
Sure, yeah, well, my name's Aryo. I'm a musician. I'm also a performer, I'm a composer and also a teacher. And yeah, right now I just got back from a big holiday and I'm ready to get into 2025 with a whole bunch of new creative projects. So I'm in a really happy space.
That's fantastic. And when you say holiday, I know that you were on residency in a lot of places and that you were being your creative self as you travelled. And I know also that you're a producer as well.
Yeah, well, the whole music production side of things is a very recent thing in my artistic practice. So while my partner Shirin and I, who is an animator, we were away for nearly a year, about 10 months, and we did a mixture of artistic things like some arts residencies and also just a lot of informal music practice and animation practice. And one of the residencies we did was in Spain, where I got to work with a whole bunch of music production softwares and things like that. And so I've really been enjoying getting more into the sort of music production side of things recently. My background is as a performer, and there was a time in my history where I would say, no microphones, everything acoustic, and that was definitely my take on things. But the world of I guess the recorded music industry has been a really exciting thing for me recently. So that's been a really big thing.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear, because obviously you're a horn player. We have your trumpet here.
Yep.
And I can see where you would have that philosophy, because it's a very loud instrument.
Absolutely.
But so that must be really interesting to get on the other side of the desk, so to speak, like to actually be able to be more in control of your sound and some effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, I've sort of gone through a whole bunch of different trajectories in my brass playing. Like I started here in Bendigo in high school doing classical music, which I loved for a period of time. Then when I went to university, I went to Monash University and I studied jazz on trombone there, which was a wonderful experience. And at that time I was really, really into jazz. And then post-university, I was getting a lot more into, I would say, like free improvisation. I was also playing a lot of dance music, and sort of all these things were happening. And I guess this is just the next step in what happens, you know, in my trajectory, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. And just to take a moment out from the here and now and travel back and think a bit about your cultural roots.
Absolutely.
And when you started to play music and to perform, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm Indonesian-Australian, and so my mum is from Yogyakarta in Central Java. And I would say I come from a family of artists and teachers. So ever since I was a little kid, my parents had me up at cultural festivals around Central Victoria, around Bendigo, Castlemaine, you name it, with their community gamelan group. So I would say from my parents' perspective, they are artists, but for them, music and art and culture is a way of bringing people together. And I would say their focus is very much on community building, on that level of culture, bringing people together in a community setting. And so ever since my sister and I were kids, we would be out performing, dancing, traditional Indonesian dances, playing Indonesian music. And yeah, that was, I guess, our introduction to the artistic world, and it was a really beautiful place to start.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to see your parents and doing gamelan performances, and it's amazing, and they're truly generous of spirit with what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they still continue their practice, like their group Mugi Rahayu, which is a community-based gamelan group based just out in Epilog, which is where they live, is still active and performs, I would say, every couple of weeks for community events. And it's all a really sort of beautiful, tight-knit community, mixed Indonesians and non-Indonesian people, really open to anyone, from kids aged 1 to some more elderly people, maybe aged over 80, up to 90. So it's a real mixed bag, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it really is, yeah. And so we've heard about what you're doing now, and we've heard about where you come from and your cultural roots. How do you feel that those two come together and present in how you perform now, and how your view of the world and your take on creativity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say more recently, as in within the last, let's say, 6 months, I would say some of the cultural roots of my music have really come to the fore. I have recently been working on a project for an organisation called Punctum, which is a arts organisation based in Castlemaine. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a live arts organisation. People can look up Punctum, Punctum Inc.
Yeah.
And yeah, they do amazing stuff. But carry on.
Yeah. So Jude, who runs that organisation, has made a lot of opportunities for me, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 years, which is when I started working with them. And that all started with a performance which was called the Cultural Makan about 3 years ago, I would say, where I got to work with a musician, Justin Marshall, who is a phenomenal performer, a sort of everything kind of musician. He's just a great improviser, a really great studio engineer, a really great percussionist, everything.
And super enthusiastic.
Exactly right. I would say he's one of the most enthusiastic musicians I've performed with.
That's right. Shout out to Justin.
Shout out to Justin, exactly right. And working with him has been like this journey over the last couple of years, and we recently did a show actually here in Bendigo, just up the road at the
Capitol.
Yeah, or just next to the Capitol in the
old fire station.
In the old fire station, exactly. And that performance was also related to the residency I did at the end of our trip, which was in Sumatra. I got to do a 1-month residency over there in an area called Riau, particularly in a city called Pekanbaru, and that was to study the traditional music there and make a concert at the end, which we did in Jakarta.
Wow.
But during that time, which was absolutely phenomenal, I got to learn a whole bunch of traditional repertoire from Pekanbaru, from Riau province, that is quite, I would say, quite an unknown. Like even for Indonesians and ethnomusicologists and people who are quite interested and well versed in that part of the world and the music of that part of the world, I would say it's still a very unknown genre of music. And so I got to take a lot of those traditional songs, and for this concert that we did, which was maybe a month ago, we got to use those songs as a starting point for our improvisation, and so I did a lot of singing and a lot of melody playing, and with Justin and also with 2 other musicians, with Zoe and Kiri, who are some amazing also regional-based artists. And so, yeah, that was a really, I would say for me, that was a really crucial point, because I feel like I finally achieved something which I've been trying to do for a very long time, which is having a successful fusion of traditional Indonesian music and with a contemporary practice, I would say, with the lens of art, music and improvisation. And I think we really achieved it. And I think that's where I would say is that's the fruition of a whole long history of playing gamelan my whole life, and learning all different kinds of traditional Indonesian music as well, not just Central Javanese, but also all over different parts of Indonesia. And then also my history of improvisation, which goes back for quite a long time as well. So yeah, that's how I would sort of say the melding has been happening now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And I really look forward to seeing what comes out of all of that, because things always, as you know, and as you've described, things always are in a state of flux and change and open to influences and what comes along the way. So what would you say compels you? Like what is your reason for keeping playing and keeping making music?
Well, I would say there's a lot of reasons. Definitely connection to culture, particularly when I play traditional music, is a really important part for me. Even if it's not necessarily just Indonesian music, I perform a lot with a Serbian or Balkan brass band down in Melbourne called Bato, which are an amazing big brass band. They have up to 13, 14 people,
Wow.
maybe down to 8 at its smallest lineup. And that is not my culture. I was not born into a Balkan culture, but being part of that, and we play a lot at weddings and christenings and all kinds of community events, for the Orthodox community or anything. Also, we play publicly every now and then when we get around to it. But that's what I would say is it's a really deep culture, and even participating in that culture, though it's not what I was born into, is really beautiful and important for me, and fuels me to keep my practice on the instrument going. Similarly, I would say for when I play in the Latin community, I do a lot of performing with salsa bands, also with son cubano bands, and doing all those concerts for that community as well, which, as we all know, the Latin community down in Melbourne is super vibrant. The dancing on Sundays at the Night Cat, all the festivals, the food festivals for all the asado and all those kind of things. A really, really beautiful cultural event, and I also feel quite a sense of connection to that as well. So I would say the connection to culture and the connection to the way that music brings a community and a specific community together is what really keeps me excited about performing and keeps me excited about my practice.
Yeah, music is such a strong thread, isn't it? And such a driving force, and really brings a lot of culture to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a beautiful expression
Yeah,
of
yeah. I
culture.
would say it's the liveliness of a culture. It's the sort of the celebration and the thing that gets people out of their houses and gets them on the street and gets them together. And yeah, I really love that about music. I would say that's maybe even the first thing that drew me to considering a career in music as well. Would be that element of music.
Yeah, wow, interesting. When you were in Sumatra doing the residency, when you were learning those traditional songs, were you mostly learning the melodies and the words? Were you playing them on an instrument at all? Like, how
That's
did
a
that
great
work?
question. It really was a mix of things. I would say there were sort of two elements to it. The structure of the residency itself was we went out to a little tiny village up in the mountains called Kampar, which for a tiny little village has a lot of beautiful musicians there and a lot of mentors there, as well as some young musicians that are from that area. And while we were in that village, we got to study two particular styles. There was the Chalembong, which is I would say similar to gamelan, though structurally quite different, which is a whole bunch of percussion instruments which we got to learn some patterns, and they have some drums, some gongs, some pots, and all those beautiful instruments, which is an instrumental style. And so we also went to another village where there was a Chalimpong ensemble that was only performed by women, which was a very interesting, I would say, cultural statement, but apparently it's been like that for quite a long time in that village. And so they had their own unique style of playing that we got to listen and learn from for a day. And then the other side of it, I would say, was learning the vocal tradition of the Kampar region, which for me, as someone who had a long history in gamelan, I found that very interesting, but I would say I was particularly interested in the vocal tradition because vocal styles is a bit more of a new thing for me. I do a lot of vocal now, a lot of contemporary vocal as well as traditional vocal for bands that I perform with. But in Kampar, they have this beautiful tradition called pantun, which is essentially a sort of sung poetry. And it's sung differently on different sides of the village. For example, in Kampar Kiri, on the west side of the river, they sing these pantun, these set poetry, in a particular way. But for example, in Kampar Kanan, which is over the other side of the river, they will sing similar poetry, but in a totally different melodic style.
Wow.
And so they have this really
It's like birds.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Birds have different songs in different regions.
Yes, absolutely. And what I feel whenever I study Indonesian music in particular, though all musical styles I feel like have this to a degree, but what I think Indonesia has more than any other place in the world that I've seen is the diversity of musical styles and the diversity of like language styles and how that influences the music. Like I really feel like in Indonesia, if you go over to one side of the river, you really can feel the difference culturally and musically. And if you go over to the other side of the hill, you'll have a whole nother ensemble that plays in a whole nother way. And I really feel like Indonesia is I would say quite a pinnacle of that level of diversity. And so seeing that and being having the time, having a month to really sit down and study that was really a blessing, I would say. Like it really enriched my view. And I would also say important for me too, because I think in Indonesian music, I mean, some styles have become quite popular, like Balinese gamelan is quite popular. Also, Javanese gamelan to a level it has become quite popularized. But then there's these really beautiful, unique styles of music that really haven't made it to the broader scene or the global music scene at all. And so, yeah, to study the poetry, to study the vocal styles, the melodies was, yeah, it was a really beautiful time. Yeah.
Wow, it sounds amazing and so inspiring. And it's beautiful that you've been able to bring that experience of that powerful month learning those traditions into that contemporary performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really feel like that's if where I would really like to head, particularly with my artistic practice, is more towards those kind of things. I've spent years and years doing lots of dance music and cultural music, but I really feel a lot of pleasure and a lot of fulfillment in kind of using traditional music and trying to do something creative with it. I would say that gives me a lot of fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of the project that you did with Sharon for Dunya Better.
Yeah.
When I was working for MAV in Bendigo.
Absolutely.
And you did you used a traditional song. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it was quite a while ago.
Oh no, but that was a really beautiful moment. I remember it was sort of at the end of COVID, so everyone was sort of finding their feet again, and the Dunya Better project was a really beautiful opportunity to express sort of cultural connection. And I remember the brief for the project was to create a work of art that is connected to your culture and connected to your roots. And for Shirin and I, that meant looking back to our childhood. It was actually the first opportunity to do a work together. So that was also a really beautiful experience for the animation and music to be paired up in that way. And the work we made was called Spinning in Your Childhood. And it was, I guess, the feeling of being in your childhood and connecting to your roots in that way, which is why I chose the traditional song from Central Java called Nawang Sekar, which is traditionally actually a gamelan song. But once again, that was, I would say, the really start of this journey in my practice was to take that traditional song, and then I remember putting a whole bunch of sort of chord changes, which is quite a jazz approach, I would say, but then also sort of having a bit more of a kind of soundscape. I remember recording the birds around where we were living and adding that in as a layer into the music, and then having the traditional vocal on top, but then also having that as with quite an improvisational approach, I would say. So it was, I would say that was maybe the start of, that was at the very beginning of this trajectory in my practice. And it was a really beautiful opportunity. And I think Multicultural Arts Victoria has a really beautiful space there, because in Central Victoria, I know as someone who's grown up here, there isn't always a lot of opportunities for emerging artists, particularly in that field of a kind of more experimental and those kind of approaches. And I think Multicultural Arts Victoria has a really great space there to support those artists.
Yeah, it's true, because often I think particularly in a place probably more like what Bendigo was like 10, 15 years ago, or in the time that you were growing up.
Yes, yeah.
It's a pretty white place, and a lot of expectation on people was to do things in a traditional way, not to experiment, not to explore new artistic territory, but to hark back to traditional roots rather than moving forward and merging and changing. And that is different now, but in the time that you grew up, it must have felt a bit like you were cast as here's the little Indonesian kid that has to be in the gamelan. And that's, that was what was sort of expected from the dominant culture, I guess.
Yeah. I would say in Bendigo, I've seen a lot of positive change recently.
Yeah.
I would say communities are diversifying. I would say there is also more appreciation for the arts in general. I mean, right now, my partner and I live in Castlemaine, which has always been a bit of an arts hub, but even that I've seen really big changes in the last 5 or 10 years. And I really think that those positive changes are a wonderful thing, for people of colour, but also for artists and also for young people like myself who are pursuing a career in the arts and a career in performing arts particularly. And I definitely did feel that when I was growing up, there wasn't much of a space for that unless you were, for example, interested in, I guess you could either say classical music or blues.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was space for those sorts of things, but not space for much else.
Yeah.
But what I really am feeling is that there is becoming an awareness of those kind of things, more of an awareness for, people of colour and their cultures and being hopefully more and more welcomed into this community. Which is an ongoing thing, and I think that as Bendigo progresses, I see more of that, and I think it is it makes it a better experience for someone like myself, for example, to move back to the country after having been in Melbourne, which, as we know, is quite an arts hub and has so many cultures all kind of piled in there. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, and if we can tempt more artists to move back to the country, I think that'll help enrich these communities even more.
Yeah. Well, look, I think they're flooding in. I think some of that's economic as well. Like my partner and I definitely moved to Malden near Castlemaine because we couldn't afford to live in Melbourne, so we moved to the country. But it is an incredibly vibrant sort of creative scene, and the lifestyle of being amongst nature in all of those things, it's it's great. And then it's not too far to go to Melbourne for a gig.
Totally, and it is so enriching. I think sometimes what I felt when I was a practicing artist in Melbourne was that it is, like you said, it's such a vibrant community down there as well, but you do really miss out on the element of space. And I think being in Central Victoria, particularly for me, because I grew up here, but also just being in a natural environment can be so enriching for your art. And I would say that ever since I was a child, that's been a really important part of it for me. I would say it's also part of the reason I love brass, because what I felt when I was a child was that brass could feel that the vast space of the bush and that kind of openness and that resonance was really, I would say, compatible with that. With where I was and growing up in the bush, it felt like the right thing at the time. So I would say that was one of the things that actually drew me to brass in the first place.
The open space.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So when did you did you start on trombone or trumpet?
Well, I actually started on euphonium, which
okay.
is for those who don't know, euphonium is a lower brass instrument, a little bit like a tuba, and really only used in classical or wind band context. It's got a beautiful sound.
Brass bands.
Or in brass bands, exactly. And that sort of started that whole trajectory in that direction. I did play with the Green Band, the City of Bendigo Brass Band, for years growing up, which was also a wonderful community experience.
Training ground.
I absolutely loved it. And then there was a point where there was a small music festival run by a now friend of mine, Andy Rigby, who runs a lot of beautiful folk music workshops and music camps, and he's just a real pillar of the folk music community here in Central Victoria. And he organised a concert with this brass band called Opa Bato, which I might have mentioned earlier, which is a Serbian brass band. And I saw that concert as I would say maybe 14-year-old, something like that. I just started learning euphonium. And at the time I was kind of like, oh yeah, I like euphonium. It's a beautiful sound and I love playing music, so that's great. And then I saw a brass band playing in the traditional style of the Balkans, which has a lot of influence from Roma culture, so from the Gypsy culture, and is really invigorating and as a band that plays at weddings, it really has this kind of celebration and vibrancy to it. And when I saw that band play, there was actually a moment where one of the euphonium baritone players said, "Oh, does anyone in the audience have a euphonium on them? Mine's broken." And I said, "Yes, I do." And so I ran back to the car, we grabbed the instrument, and he performed on that instrument that night. And it was a real turning point for me, and I saw what the vibrancy of cultural music can do with brass. And then I bought their CD, started transcribing their music, and then went on to start my own band, heavily influenced by the traditional like Roma brass, called the Seduciphones, which is still going today. We just celebrated 10 years just a few months ago at our album launch, where we released this album here, Shake the Earth, which was, I would say, also a big sort of turning point for us. It was a big celebration of all the history that we've gone through to make this happen. And yeah, so that's sort of the story, I would say, of my brass journey.
Yeah.
And then all the other branches grew out of that, I would say. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I first saw you perform in the Seduciphones before I met you, and I saw you on stage with the Seduciphones and was like, wow, look at this amazing band of players. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm very lucky with the Seduciphones. I would say it's probably the most amazing group of professional brass players that I've had the good fortune to play with. What I would say is the love of brass is one really big side of it, and also the love of for example, gypsy brass is another side of it as well. And so we did grow up playing here in Bendigo and Castlemaine. All of the members have now moved down to the city, and we've also started playing with brass players down there as well. So we've sort of, I would say, shifted our base down there. But it did originally start as a project here in Bendigo with my high school friends, exploring music together and celebrating this new style of music which we were discovering at the time. I would say now, particularly with this album that we've just released, it has become a big fusion of many things. It's got a lot of hip-hop influence, which I've also been, since I've been getting more into production, I've been getting more interested in kind of contemporary styles, hip-hop, sort of R&B and a few of those other styles. And I would say this album is our go at merging traditional styles and contemporary styles and trying to make the biggest, danciest, brassiest sound that we could. And I think we did achieve that with this album. So it's a really, it was a really proud moment for me to put this thing out into the world, which is it's all but one of the songs are my own composition. So it's really quite an exciting thing for me.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And where can people get it if they want to have a listen?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, if people are interested, it was our first time printing vinyl, which is quite an exciting thing for us. As you can see here, it's come out really nicely. We also have CDs, and it's also available for streaming and Spotify, which is always great if anyone wants to listen to it. It's the Seduciphones, and the album is Shake the Earth. So in any streaming platform, anything, if people would like to contribute or purchase a vinyl or something, you can find that on Bandcamp or via our website, which is just seduciphones.com.
Yeah, have you got them in Bendigo Records?
In Bendigo Records? Yeah. No, I haven't yet. I should take some in. Absolutely, I should.
Yeah, because they'll usually buy one or two copies. And then they just sell them, and then they contact you and ask for.
Oh, absolutely! Yeah. I must do the rounds down in Melbourne as well. But it's been quite a busy summer, and I haven't got around to it yet.
It's a huge part of the getting it out there, isn't it? Like that's a whole other job. Like. You know, I mean, I don't know how one person can be expected to kind of like compose the content, perform the content, record it, and then have to sell it as well.
It is a really big job, and I know for many people in the music industry, especially for musicians and creatives, it can be a very tiring part of it. But I have in the past battled with it, but what I would say is I feel like it is just the last step of the music, and while it's not necessarily the funnest part of music, it is something that you've got to do. And I agree, it can be pretty overwhelming, especially for young artists. I know there was a time when I would say that was a barrier to performing, is doing all of the sort of nitty-gritty media promotion, selling tickets, all that kind of stuff. But when you do get it done, it is a really rewarding thing as well to know that you've achieved it. To have a vinyl in your hand, to sell that to someone at a show is really a beautiful feeling, and it is something that I've really sort of cherished it since we've put this one out.
Yeah. So you've had an amazing career so far, and you're still very young. What are things that you think would have helped you along the way? Like what support could be provided by organisations like MAV or council or the rest of the music ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Forrest. I think I should start by saying what supports I did experience in the past. I mean, we already talked about the Dunya Beta project, which was a really beautiful moment in time, and I think for me a really good sort of lift-off point for my own sort of creative practice right at the time that I was moving back to Central Victoria. A little before that, I also took part in a mentorship program which was run by the Australian Art Orchestra. And I have a lot of respect for the Australian Art Orchestra. I think they do a lot of wonderful projects. And I think their mentorship program is a really great thing for emerging artists to pair up with a particular mentor from the art orchestra and do a few workshops. I think it was about 3 workshops, which at the time it was the end of COVID, so they were via Zoom, which was not ideal, but which was basically an opportunity for emerging artists to show some of their work to someone who's working as a professional in that industry, particularly in the art music industry. And get feedback and ask questions about what way to move forward. And for me, that was a really, really beautiful experience. I was mentored with an amazing bass player and vocalist and artist called Helen Svoboda. And actually just the other day, she was also part of the program that we did here in Bendigo with Punctum. So that was like a really beautiful thing for maybe 3 or 4 years down the line to sort of team up again with my past mentor and see where we are with our creative practice at the time. So that was a really, really, both of those things were really beautiful experiences. I feel like one of the things that I've reflected a lot on as a young artist grew up in Central Victoria was that there are some opportunities like this present, but what I feel like is sometimes lacking with opportunities like this is that there is not often a sense of continuity with those opportunities. So, for example, with the art orchestra, while I have done some work with them more recently, programs like this are definitely, and even with something like the Dunya Beta, are sort of like these really beautiful opportunities and moments in time. But what I feel like could be really helpful is for there to be some level of ongoing nature in these programs. If there's some way that an artist could work with these programs and then have some kind of ongoing thing, maybe over a period of a year or 2 years at regular intervals. I feel like that could be really helpful. And it's also something that I've sort of been talking to with Punctum in Castlemaine, which we mentioned about Punctum earlier, and they're such a wonderful organisation. And one of the things that's been really present in the mind of Jude and the whole team there has been trying to work out different ways to engage with emerging artists, but engage with them particularly in a way that is regionally based and is ongoing. And I think those are sort of the 2 challenges that organisation has been sort of grappling with. And I totally commend their efforts in that direction. And I know their program's expanding field of practice, which I have been part of for the last 3 years or so, which has involved some mentored intensives where I've been both a mentee and a mentor over the last 3 years, have been a really great step in that direction. And I think for regional arts programs, really aiming for something that's accessible to regionally based artists to do their practice in a regional setting and to have some sense of an ongoing nature to these programs is a really helpful, I guess, mindset that I've sort of had in the last couple of years, especially in the last 3 years since moving back to Castlemaine. And I think that could be, really helpful to, for example, to my younger self. Opportunities like that might have been enough to make me not feel like Melbourne was the only opportunity for me to make my music. And I feel like a lot of young artists do feel that. I know they feel that calling, as if the calling that Melbourne is the place where creativity does happen, and that's true. But I feel like offering an alternative would be really helpful to young artists here in the regions.
And how do you think that might look? Because I think it's not just young artists that need that. It's not even quite level of support, but it's a level of connection.
Yeah.
I think it's quite intergenerational. So.
Oh, you are so right. And I think you've hit the nail on the head with the words community and support. With what you said just brought into mind one of the other mentees who was I worked with through Punctum as well, Sal, who's an amazing vocalist, trained classically in her past and so she's got this amazing technique. But I know was having trouble finding a creative outlet for experimental music in Castlemaine, and so I think in her own words, just realizing that there is a community there and just being a vehicle of bringing those people, those like-minded people together might well be enough, you know. And I found it for me connecting with musicians like Justin or connecting with musicians like Aviva or any of those regional or partly regional based creatives, just realizing that there's a community there is so helpful. And I think you're right. I mean, it can come at any point. I mean, you know, some of the people in, you know, for example, my parents' community gamelan group, or who have been working as with Punctum at all ages, and yeah, I think you're so right to mention that. I think it's not just for young creatives. I think it really should be for anyone who has the desire to become part of a creative scene around where they're living, which is
yeah. Well, I think we all bounce off each other, so that having somewhere that's a bit of common ground where people can connect, and rather than having to ring someone up and say, oh, actually, hi, Justin, I need your advice about this. If there's a bit more of a community-based informal setting where you bump into each other and go, oh, I was meaning to ask you about this thing. It's like, could be quite different. So I guess fostering that type of open, community-based gathering together
and I feel
make
like
a difference.
Yeah, for my own experience of moving back to the country and through all these various programs, realizing that there is a community there and then connecting with these artists in a practical setting has definitely led me to connect with all these different artists in a sort of social and emotional setting. And I think you're so right when you say that, like, that's just as important. From a community perspective, from an individual perspective, having those people to bounce your ideas off, to go and have a Sunday dinner and talk about what's on the go, you know, what pots have you got on the stove right now, so to speak, is what is going to be the hinge for, you know, arts practice in regional areas, at least in my experience of it.
Yeah, definitely. Look, one of the things I love about being regionally based and living in a regional area is that I don't have to go far to run into my artistic friends and colleagues. Like I can be at the market or go out to a gig and then people are there and you don't have to orchestrate as much, oh, I need to visit such and such, because you're regularly seeing people whilst you're out and about. And I think that's one of the absolute joys about being in a smaller community. It's
totally. You know, like the chats at we're frequent, Shirin and I are frequents to the Wednesday Farmers Market, and you always bump into someone there. It's amazing, you know, it really is. Places where the community can meet and just have a chat over the veggies is just a wonderful thing. And so enriching to practice.
Have you got any advice that you would give to your childhood self, maybe to that 4-year-old who was playing gamelan in the group, or maybe to your teenage self, or even yourself that was at jazz school?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I would say I would have different advice for different periods of my life. I feel like while I was at jazz school, it was the first time I moved down to the city from the country, and I would say I was very excited with performing with all these different bands. At the time, I might have been performing 5 nights a week all over Melbourne, and it was a really, really exciting time, which was a wonderful thing. I would say, though, if I do have any advice to my younger self, it's when you are in an institution like a university to study, for example, something like jazz, I would say maybe focus a bit more on that. I feel like I maybe got a little bit excited and distracted by so many other avenues in music, but what I would say is, you know, institutions have their limitations. They can be quite restrictive. I know I found my university to be a little bit restrictive in my artistic practice, but perhaps that is for a reason, and perhaps it's good while you're there, whether or not it's the most exciting thing, to really knuckle down and make as much use of that time. So I would say that would be my advice to my university self. I would say also, if I could talk back to my younger self even before going to university, it's that I guess I, for very obvious reasons, have always really focused on celebration and performance, and I do feel like that's a wonderful thing. But if I could offer any advice, I would say maybe to focus on my own artistic development, maybe over the nitty-gritty of bands and management and all those kind of other things that are a necessity. And I'm really grateful that I learnt all those skills and that I did help push all these bands over these lines and get all these kind of things done and get us performing at festivals. But what I would say is what I'm finding really enriching now is focusing on myself, focusing on what I find most artistically fulfilling, which right now is practicing trumpet and working on music production. And to really just let myself do those things right from the get-go. And that I feel like that would be, if I could offer any advice to any young artist, it's that really let yourself do it. If you feel like you want to, for example, for me, I found moving over to trumpet to be the most enriching thing. And if you're feeling that urge, just run with it. Don't second guess yourself, even if you've got certain deadlines with other instruments and certain professional things that you need to fulfill. I would say let yourself run with your artistic and creative side, and that will hopefully lead you in the right direction.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing advice. And I think, as creative people, we have these it's like almost an obsession or a compulsion, like this need to do something. Like, who would choose it as a life, to be, some people do okay financially, but a lot of us are pretty poor. Yep. But who would choose it's not a struggle, but that, devotion, I guess, to a craft. It's there within us, and it has ways it needs to come out. So I think that's really great advice, to just say follow that passion. And sometimes you don't even know. Like, for some people, they can see an instrument and just go, I want to play that.
Yep.
So I think it's,
Yeah, totally. Just that openness to run with it, I think, is a really important thing. And at least in my own experience as well, while I've been working as a professional performer for many years now, I would say actually, also from the financial side of things, allowing myself to embrace what I would say is really my true, cultural and performative direction has also been enriching financially or beneficial financially. And I would say that if there was a fear at a certain point in time that if I didn't do the performative practice that I was doing at the time, that I would lose out financially. And actually, I would say that it's actually been beneficial since making that change. And so I think, just having the bravery to say, I have to let some things go in order to move in this direction. But doing that, I feel like if someone had told me that actually at the time that was the right choice, I feel like that actually would have been helpful for me at the time, because you do have the fear of going into the unknown, but going to the unknown, at least in my experience, was absolutely the right thing.
Well, hold on to that love of jumping off and jumping into the river and seeing where it takes you.
Absolutely,
and following the flow, because I think it's really important, because we're who we are, and only you can make the work that you're going to make. And it's true of every creative person. So I think it's really important for us to follow that and not try and conform. Sometimes I find myself thinking, why do I want to make this work? What is this even about? But it keeps coming back. It just keeps floating to the surface, and I've learned over many years to just go with that and follow it and trust it.
Yeah. And I think, that's, Forrest, that's just such great advice to all creatives. And, we all face that struggle at times. And I think also just knowing that we're all facing that challenge, it can be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you do ever feel lost, I feel like just remembering that every creative and all the people that you look up to and respect have gone through that challenging time. It really,
Yeah.
that can be really helpful as well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be really true, and but also it can, like when the flow is happening, it can be so much fun. Like
Oh,
it's like the most exciting thing ever, and so of course that's why we do what we do.
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things you touched on, which is that every artist has their own unique voice, and that only that artist can create that voice. I think realizing that has also been really helpful to me. I feel like maybe at times I've not shied away from, but let's say maybe separated my traditional music and my traditional practice as an Indonesian person. I would say I haven't in the past linked that as much with my professional life and my performative work and all the work I do for festivals and performing bands and all that kind of stuff. I feel like when I realised that actually I am the only person sitting in this seat who has, you know, grown up in Bendigo as a half Indonesian person, but also has this one particular history in creative music and practice. I think when I did realize that and started merging those things together, then that created the sweetest fruit, let's say, of my own practice.
Absolutely,
And so I think accepting that voice and that particular angle that I have, I think has been really, really beneficial for me. And and like I say, probably the most exciting and the most the most exciting part of my practice
yeah.
recently.
Yeah. Oh, it's just so wonderful to hear about. It's so wonderful to hear about so many aspects that I hadn't heard before, and to have this conversation with you is really interesting.
Yeah, it's
And
been
I'm
really
sure
great
it's
to
going to
talk to
be
you. Yeah.
super inspiring for people that are watching or listening to, you know, see where they might end up themselves as well.
Totally. And you know, as we mentioned earlier, Central Victoria and regional Victoria in general is really starting to become, I feel like, the communities are popping up that really can start to nurture, you know, younger and emerging artists. And I guess, it really is my hope that in moving back to Central Victoria and in being part of these communities, that I can sort of, you know, help younger artists that are sort of, I know, going through the challenges that I faced and the sort of, you know, maybe sometimes what can seem like a bit of a stark environment in you know, places like Bendigo can really start to be more of a multicultural and enlivening, you know, place to be and
Yeah.
to make art.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Forrest.